Welcome to our channel. Today, we are going to explore a chilling and tragic true story, a case that once shocked the public, known as the Tenant trap. Let's follow the investigation and uncover the mysteries behind the death of a young woman, a victim of an unsuspected perpetrator. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more captivating stories. Now, let's begin our story. The late autumn air bit with a chill that promised a harsh winter, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy that usually radiated from the bustling university town of Havenwood. Leaf-strewn pavements, once a picturesque tapestry of gold and crimson, now lay damp and decaying, mirroring the unsettling mood that had settled over the community. It had been 5 days since Sarah Jenkins, a bright and ambitious 20-year-old criminology student, had last been seen. Her absence was a gaping wound in the lives of her friends and family, a void that grew larger and more terrifying with each passing hour. Sarah was not the type to simply vanish. Punctual, responsible, and meticulously organized, her life was a carefully constructed mosaic of lectures, study groups, part-time work at the campus library, and fervent discussions with her housemates about the latest true crime documentaries. Her social media, usually a steady stream of updates and witty observations, had gone silent. Her phone went straight to voicemail, a chillingly monotonous robotic voice replacing her cheerful greeting. It was as if she had been erased, meticulously wiped from the digital and physical world she inhabited. Her housemates, Liam and Chloe, were the first to raise the alarm. They shared a cozy, albeit slightly dilapidated, 3-bedroom house just off campus, a place they affectionately called the study sanctuary. On Tuesday evening, Sarah had left for her part-time shift at the library, promising to be back by 10 p.m. She never returned. At first, Liam and Chloe assumed she decided to pull an all-nighter at the library, a common occurrence during midterms. But by Wednesday morning, when her bed remained unmade and her textbook, dog-eared and highlighted, lay open on her desk, a knot of unease began to tighten in Chloe's stomach. "She always tells us if she's staying out," Chloe fretted, pacing the small living room, her eyes darting to Sarah's empty chair. "Even if it's just a coffee with a classmate after work." Liam, usually the more laid-back of the two, also felt the prickle of concern. Maybe her phone died? Or she's just forgotten to charge it and gotten caught up in something. He tried to sound reassuring, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his own growing fear. He knew Sarah too well. She was meticulous about her phone battery, especially when she was out alone at night. By Thursday, the casual concern had morphed into full-blown panic. Chloe, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, finally called the police. Officer Miller, a seasoned detective with a weary but kind face, took the initial report. He listened patiently as Chloe detailed Sarah's routine, her academic achievements, her aspirations to join the FBI. He noted the absence of any signs of forced entry, no struggle, nothing overtly amiss in her room. It was as if she had simply walked out the door and dissolved into the crisp autumn air. The initial police response was standard: interviews with her friends, checks of her usual haunts, and a canvass of the neighborhood. The library staff confirmed Sarah had clocked out at 9:47 p.m. on Tuesday, as scheduled. A blurry CCTV image showed her leaving the building, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a determined look on her face as she headed towards the main campus gate. After that, the trail went cold. Sarah's parents, David and Emily Jenkins, arrived in Havenwood on Friday morning, their faces etched with a grief that hadn't yet found a definitive cause. Emily clutched a framed photo of Sarah, her daughter's infectious smile a cruel mockery of the grim reality. David, a stoic man who rarely showed emotion, openly wept as he described Sarah's meticulous nature, her unwavering commitment to her studies, and her deep love for her family. "She wouldn't just leave," he choked out to Officer Miller, his voice raw with pain. "She just wouldn't." The police escalated the investigation, forming a dedicated task force. Posters with Sarah's smiling face and the words, "missing," began to appear on every lamppost, every storefront window, every bulletin board in Havenwood. Local news channels picked up the story, broadcasting Sarah's image to a wider audience, hoping someone, somewhere, had seen something, anything, that could shed light on her disappearance. The university, usually a vibrant hub of youthful energy, became subdued, a pall of anxiety hanging heavy in the air. Students walked with lowered gazes, whispering theories, their usual carefree demeanor replaced by a pervasive sense of vulnerability. If Sarah, so responsible and aware, could vanish without a trace, who was safe? The investigation focused on several key areas. They interviewed Sarah's professors, who spoke of her intelligence and dedication. They spoke to her classmates, who described her as friendly but reserved, not one for late-night parties or risky behavior. They delved into her personal life, scrutinizing her relationships, her online presence, searching for any hint of trouble, any secret she might have been keeping. But Sarah's life, as far as they could tell, was an open book, albeit a meticulously organized one. One person of interest quickly emerged: Arthur Finch, Sarah's landlord. Finch owned the house Sarah shared with Liam and Chloe. He was a man in his late 50s, a recluse by nature, known for his meticulous attention to detail and his unwavering insistence on prompt rent payments. He lived alone in a large, imposing Victorian house on the outskirts of town, a property he had inherited from his eccentric aunt. Finch had a reputation for being somewhat peculiar, a man who preferred the company of his antique books to that of other people. He was often seen tending his overgrown garden, clad in an old tweed jacket, a permanent scowl on his face. Officer Miller and his team visited Finch on Saturday morning. The house, with its peeling paint and boarded-up windows, exuded an air of neglect, a stark contrast to the perfectly manicured lawns of his neighbors. Finch answered the door cautiously, his eyes, magnified by thick glasses, scanning them with suspicion. He was a thin man with a wispy, graying beard and a nervous tic that caused his right eye to twitch involuntarily. He admitted to knowing Sarah, describing her as a quiet and polite tenant who always paid her rent on time. He claimed he hadn't seen her since the beginning of the month when she had dropped off the rent check. He offered no further information, his answers curt and evasive, his gaze shifting uncomfortably under Miller's probing questions. When asked if he had any keys to the house, he admitted to having a spare set for emergencies, but insisted he had not used them. His demeanor, though not overtly hostile, was certainly unwelcoming, fueling a subtle unease within the investigating officers. Miller noticed a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in Finch's hands as he spoke, and a defensive edge to his voice whenever Sarah's name was mentioned. It wasn't enough to raise immediate alarm, but it was enough to make Miller file him away in the back of his mind as someone to keep an eye on. Finch's reclusiveness, combined with the lack of any other viable leads, made him a logical, if not yet primary, suspect. As the days turned into a week, the hope that had sustained Sarah's loved ones began to fray. The initial flurry of media attention dwindled, replaced by other, more pressing news stories. The posters, once crisp and new, became tattered and faded, their message of hope slowly eroding under the relentless wind and rain. Emily Jenkins clung to the belief that her daughter would be found, safe and sound, but the gnawing fear in her heart grew stronger with each passing moment. David, usually the pillar of strength, seemed to shrink with each day, his shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant. Liam and Chloe, consumed by guilt and grief, tried to piece together Sarah's last known movements, replaying every conversation, every interaction, searching for a clue they might have missed. They talked to her classmates, her professors, anyone who might have seen her on that fateful Tuesday evening. But the answers were always the same. Sarah had left the library, and then she was gone. The police, despite their best efforts, were hitting brick walls. No witnesses had come forward who saw Sarah after she left the library. No one remembered anything unusual on the street leading to her house. The campus CCTV footage showed nothing suspicious. It was as if Sarah had stepped into a void, a black hole that had swallowed her whole, leaving behind only the agonizing question: what happened to Sarah Jenkins? The answer, unbeknownst to anyone, was already swirling in the cold, unforgiving currents of the Haven River, a dark secret waiting to be discovered, a horrifying truth that would shatter the tranquility of Havenwood and expose the darkest corners of human depravity. The search for Sarah Jenkins continued, a desperate race against time, a race that would ultimately end in tragedy. The second week of Sarah's disappearance brought with it a profound sense of despair. The weather had turned, a persistent, icy drizzle coating everything in a shimmering, miserable film. The once bustling university campus now felt eerily quiet, the usual cacophony of student life replaced by a somber hush. The posters bearing Sarah's face were now rain-streaked and torn, their hopeful message fading into a testament of unanswered prayers. Hope, once a flickering flame, was now a dying ember, struggling against the relentless winds of reality. Officer Miller, despite his years of experience with cold cases and tragic outcomes, found himself increasingly troubled by Sarah's disappearance. There were no signs of a runaway, no history of mental health issues, no disgruntled ex-boyfriends, no secret life that could explain her sudden vanishing act. It was clean, too clean, a void that defied conventional explanations. He had revisited Arthur Finch, Sarah's landlord, twice more, each time finding the man more agitated and less cooperative. Finch's nervous tics were more pronounced, his answers clipped, almost aggressive. He claimed to be bothered by the constant police presence, asserting his right to privacy, but Miller couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to his evasiveness. Finch's eyes, magnified behind his thick lenses, seemed to hold a flicker of something unreadable: fear? Guilt? Miller couldn't tell. The Haven River, a broad, meandering waterway that snaked its way through the outskirts of town before emptying into the sea, had always been a source of peace and recreation for Havenwood residents. Its banks were popular for joggers, fishermen, and families enjoying picnics on sunny afternoons. But now, with the persistent rain and the rising water levels, the river took on a more ominous character, its churning gray surface reflecting the gloom that permeated the town. It was on a dreary Saturday morning, precisely 12 days after Sarah's disappearance, that the grim discovery was made. Two local fishermen, father and son, out earlier than usual to avoid the weekend crowds, were casting their lines near a particularly deep bend in the river, a spot known for its abundant trout. The younger man, Thomas, felt his line snag on something unusually heavy, not the usual debris of branches or submerged rocks. He tugged, pulling with all his might, expecting to free his lure. Instead, a large, dark object slowly surfaced, drifting lazily with the current. At first, Thomas thought it was a discarded piece of furniture, perhaps an old mattress, waterlogged and bloated. But as it drew closer, propelled by the relentless current, a horrifying realization dawned on him. The object had a shape, an undeniable, sickeningly familiar shape. He let out a strangled cry, dropping his fishing rod, his face draining of all color. His father, bewildered, rushed to his side, his eyes following Thomas's terrified gaze. It was the body of a young woman, wrapped in a heavy, dark tarpaulin, crudely secured with thick rope. Her hands and feet were bound, and large, jagged stones were tied to the bundle, clearly intended to keep her submerged. But the river, swollen with recent rains, had decided otherwise, slowly releasing its terrible secret. The police were on the scene within minutes, the urgent wail of sirens shattering the quiet morning air. Officer Miller arrived, his heart sinking with a dreadful certainty. He knew, even before the tarpaulin was carefully cut away, who it would be. The silence that fell over the scene as the grim work began was profound, broken only by the lapping of the river and the hushed commands of the forensic team. When the tarpaulin was finally removed, the sight that greeted them was truly horrific. It was Sarah Jenkins. Her once vibrant eyes were now vacant, staring blankly at the overcast sky. Her features, though distorted by the water, were still recognizable. Her long brown hair, once meticulously styled, floated around her head like a dark halo. There were signs of struggle, faint bruising on her wrists and ankles, and a single deep laceration across her temple, suggesting a blow to the head. The cause of death, the forensics team quickly determined, was drowning. but the injuries indicated a violent struggle preceding her death. The news spread like wildfire, engulfing Havenwood in a fresh wave of shock and grief, deeper and more profound than the initial fear of her disappearance. The town, once a haven of academic pursuits, was now stained by an act of unspeakable brutality. The initial hope for Sarah's safe return was cruelly dashed, replaced by a cold, hard reality. She was gone, and her life had been violently taken. Sarah's parents were utterly devastated. Emily collapsed upon hearing the news, her heartbroken cries echoing through the police station. David, his face a mask of profound agony, could only shake his head, repeating, "My little girl, my little girl." The town mourned with them, a collective outpouring of sorrow for the promising young life cut short. The investigation, now a murder inquiry, shifted into high gear. The police cordoned off the riverbank, forensic teams meticulously combing the area for any clues, any piece of evidence that could lead them to Sarah's killer. The tarpaulin, the rope, the stones, every item was carefully collected and sent for analysis. The manner of her disposal, clearly an attempt to hide the body, spoke of a calculated and cold-blooded killer. The autopsy revealed more gruesome details. The pathologist confirmed the blow to the head, likely rendering her unconscious before she was submerged. There were defensive wounds on her arms, suggesting she had fought for her life. The time of death was estimated to be sometime late Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning, aligning perfectly with her disappearance. The police immediately re-interviewed everyone who had known Sarah, but this time with a new, more urgent focus. Liam and Chloe, though distraught, provided crucial details about Sarah's habits and any potential enemies, though they could think of none. They spoke of the quiet life Sarah led, her dedication to her studies, her dreams for the future. They couldn't fathom who would want to harm her. Arthur Finch, the landlord, was once again a person of significant interest. Officer Miller, armed with the new information, returned to Finch's secluded Victorian house. This time, Finch was even more agitated, his face pale, his hands trembling visibly as he answered the door. He feigned shock at the news of Sarah's death, muttering about the tragedy of it all. But his eyes, Miller noted, darted nervously around the room, avoiding direct eye contact. "Mr. Finch," Miller began, his voice firm, "we need to ask you some more questions. Your house is close to the river. Did you see or hear anything unusual on Tuesday night?" Finch stammered, his words disjointed. "No, nothing. I was in bed. I keep to myself, you know. I don't pay attention to what goes on outside." Miller pressed on, his gaze unwavering. "Do you still have the spare keys to the house on Elm Street?" Finch hesitated, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. "Yes, I suppose I do. For emergencies. But I didn't use them. I told you that." "We'd like to take a look at them, Mr. Finch," Miller said, his voice laced with an authority that brooked no argument. "And we'd like to search your property, if you don't mind." Finch's face contorted in a mixture of anger and fear. "My property is private. You have no right." "We can get a warrant, Mr. Finch," Miller countered calmly. "But it would be far easier if you cooperate now." The mention of a warrant seemed to break Finch's already fragile composure. He reluctantly allowed the officers inside. The house was a dusty, cluttered labyrinth, filled with stacks of old books, forgotten furniture, and a pervasive smell of mildew and neglect. As the officers began their search, Miller noticed a faint, metallic tang in the air, barely discernible beneath the other odors. In the small, dimly lit utility room at the back of the house, a crucial piece of the puzzle began to emerge. Tucked away in a dusty corner, half hidden beneath a pile of old gardening tools, was a roll of thick, dark tarpaulin, similar in color and texture to the one used to wrap Sarah's body. Beside it, coiled neatly, was a length of rope that looked suspiciously like the kind that had bound her. Miller felt a surge of adrenaline. He knelt down, examining the tarpaulin. There were faint, reddish-brown stains on it, barely visible against the dark material, but enough to trigger a cold dread. He motioned to his forensic team, "Get samples, and check these ropes." As the forensic team began their meticulous work, Another officer, searching the main living area, called out, "Detective Miller, you might want to see this." On a small, antique writing desk, tucked away in a corner, was a collection of photographs. They were all of Sarah. Not casual snapshots, but pictures taken from a distance, some through windows, others from across the street. There were dozens of them, meticulously organized, each one dated. They were not photos of a landlord documenting his property, but the unsettling collection of a stalker, an obsessed individual. The latest photo was dated Tuesday evening, just hours before Sarah disappeared, showing her leaving the library, a chillingly precise record of her last known movements. A wave of nausea washed over Miller. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, forming a picture far more sinister than he had initially imagined. The nervous tics, the evasiveness, the reclusiveness, the proximity to the river, the similar tarpaulin and rope, and now the chilling collection of photographs. It all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Arthur Finch was no longer just a person of interest. He was the prime suspect, a monster hiding in plain sight, a wolf in sheep's clothing, who had meticulously planned and executed the abduction and murder of a promising young woman. The Tenant trap had been sprung, and Sarah Jenkins had fallen victim to its cruel embrace. The hunt was far from over, but the focus had sharpened, the killer now clearly in their sights. The fight for justice for Sarah Jenkins had just begun. The air in the interrogation room was thick with tension, the sterile white walls doing little to alleviate the oppressive atmosphere. Arthur Finch sat opposite Detective Miller, his usually twitching eye now fixed in a wide, unblinking stare. He was no longer the merely evasive landlord. He was a cornered animal, his earlier attempts at feigned innocence having crumbled under the weight of mounting evidence. The forensic team had confirmed that the tarpaulin and rope found in Finch's utility room were indeed a match for those used to bind Sarah Jenkins. Traces of Sarah's DNA had been found on the tarpaulin, along with fibers from the carpet in Finch's study. The collection of photographs, chilling in their obsessive detail, now lay spread across the interrogation table, a silent testament to Finch's sinister fixation. "Mr. Finch," Miller began, his voice calm but firm, "we have to talk about these." He gestured to the photographs. "These aren't casual snapshots of your tenant. These are surveillance. Stalking." Finch's lower lip trembled. I just like photography." She was a good subject, very graceful. His voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to his earlier indignant outbursts. "Graceful," Miller scoffed, his patience wearing thin. "You followed her. You took pictures of her without her knowledge or consent. This goes beyond liking photography, Mr. Finch. This is obsession." The interrogation continued for hours, a grueling psychological battle between a seasoned detective and a man slowly unraveling under the pressure. Finch initially clung to a flimsy narrative of innocence, claiming he had merely found the tarpaulin and rope, that the DNA was a coincidence, and that the photographs were harmless. But Miller systematically dismantled his story, presenting irrefutable evidence that chipped away at Finch's composure. "We found Sarah's blood in your study, Mr. Finch," Miller stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Traces of it. Microscopic, but it's there. And it matches her DNA profile perfectly. How do you explain that?" Finch recoiled, his face paling even further. I don't know. Maybe she cut herself when she dropped off the rent check? Yes, that must be it. A paper cut, perhaps." His explanation was weak, desperate. "On Tuesday night, Mr. Finch," Miller continued, ignoring the feeble excuse, "Sarah Jenkins left the university library at 9:47 p.m. She was last seen on CCTV heading in the direction of Elm Street. Your house is very close to that route. We have no other witnesses who saw her after that point. Where were you, Mr. Finch, between 9:47 p.m. and, say, midnight on Tuesday?" Finch stammered, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. I was home, alone, reading. I always read in the evenings. Can anyone corroborate that?" Finch shook his head mutely. "No, I live alone. I told you that." Miller leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense tone. "We know you have a spare set of keys to the house on Elm Street, Mr. Finch. We also know Sarah had defensive wounds on her arms, suggesting she fought for her life. And we know she died from a blow to the head, followed by drowning. The river is just a short walk from your house. It's all connecting, Mr. Finch. Every piece of evidence points directly to you." The dam finally broke. Finch's carefully constructed facade shattered, revealing the desperate, terrified man beneath. He began to weep, a pathetic, whimpering sound that sent a shiver down Miller's spine. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he choked out, his words muffled by his sobs. She was supposed to understand. She was supposed to like me." Miller remained silent, allowing Finch to speak, to confess, to unravel his twisted narrative. Finch, through gasps and sobs, confessed to his obsession with Sarah. He had been watching her for months, captivated by her intelligence, her quiet grace, her resemblance to a young woman he had known in his youth, a woman who had rejected him. He had convinced himself that Sarah was different, that she would appreciate his intellectual companionship, that she would see beyond his awkwardness and embrace him. He saw her as an ideal, a canvas onto which he projected his loneliness and desires. On Tuesday night, consumed by his delusion, he had waited for her. He knew her routine, thanks to his meticulous surveillance. He knew she would be walking home alone after her library shift. He had let himself into the house on Elm Street with his spare key, intending, he claimed, merely to talk to her, to finally express his feelings. When Sarah arrived, she was startled to find him there. She demanded to know why he was in her house. Finch, agitated and frustrated by her lack of warmth, her evident fear, tried to explain his feelings, his love for her. Sarah, horrified and disgusted, tried to flee, to call for help. A struggle ensued. In his desperation to silence her, to prevent her from exposing him, he struck her. A single, powerful blow to the head, with a heavy, blunt object, a ceramic statue from her own bookshelf, he later admitted. He described the immediate panic that followed. Sarah lay unconscious, bleeding. His carefully constructed fantasy had shattered, replaced by a terrifying reality. He knew he couldn't leave her there. He couldn't call for help. He would be exposed, humiliated, arrested. In a frenzy of fear and twisted logic, he decided he had to dispose of the body. He retrieved the tarpaulin and rope from his utility room, the very same ones he had used for years to cover his neglected garden furniture. He bound her, his hands trembling with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. And then, using his old trolley, he wheeled her unconscious body down to the river. He confessed to throwing her into the water, the heavy stones he had collected from his garden ensuring she would sink. He watched as the murky waters swallowed her, then returned home, meticulous in his attempts to clean up the blood, to erase any trace of his horrific act. He had been convinced he had gotten away with it, that the river would keep his secret forever. Miller listened to the chilling confession, his face impassive, but his mind reeling from the depravity of it all. Finch wasn't a master criminal. He was a deeply disturbed individual, consumed by loneliness and a twisted sense of entitlement, who had lashed out in a moment of panic and terror. Sarah Jenkins, a vibrant young woman with a future full of promise, had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, renting a room from a monster who had meticulously planned her downfall. After his full confession, Finch was formally arrested. The news ripped through Havenwood, a mixture of relief that the killer was caught, and profound sorrow at the revelation of the motive. The image of the peculiar, reclusive landlord was replaced by the terrifying reality of a cold-blooded killer. The tenant trap had claimed its victim, and the community was left grappling with the horrifying truth. The police then focused on gathering every last piece of evidence for the prosecution. The ceramic statue, meticulously cleaned by Finch, was recovered from his study. Traces of Sarah's blood, though faint, were found within its crevices. More DNA evidence, forensic analysis of the tarpaulin, rope, and the meticulous collection of photographs, all solidified the case against Arthur Finch. The Jenkins family, though heartbroken, found a small measure of solace in the arrest. At least now they knew. At least now Sarah would have justice. Emily, her eyes still red-rimmed, spoke to the media, her voice trembling but resolute. "He took our daughter, but he won't take our hope for justice." Sarah deserved so much more than this. Liam and Chloe, still reeling from the shock, were called to provide witness statements, their detailed accounts of Sarah's life and Finch's peculiar behavior adding further weight to the prosecution's case. They struggled to reconcile the image of their quiet, studious friend with the horrific end she had met at the hands of their own landlord. The house on Elm Street, once a symbol of shared dreams and aspirations, now felt tainted, a monument to a terrible crime. As Arthur Finch was led away to a holding cell, the weight of his actions, the full gravity of what he had done, seemed to finally settle upon him. He was no longer the defiant recluse, but a broken man, facing a lifetime behind bars. The serene facade of Havenwood had been shattered, revealing the lurking darkness beneath. The memory of Sarah Jenkins, her vibrant smile and boundless potential, would forever serve as a poignant reminder of the Tenant trap and the devastating consequences of unchecked obsession and violence. The town would heal, eventually, but the scar of Sarah's death would remain, a permanent shadow over its once tranquil streets. The next chapter would see the legal battle begin, the fight to ensure that Arthur Finch paid the ultimate price for his heinous crime. The trial of Arthur Finch for the murder of Sarah Jenkins became the most talked-about event in Havenwood's recent history. The small, usually sleepy courthouse was abuzz with activity, packed daily with journalists, legal enthusiasts, and members of the public eager to witness justice being served. The case had captured national attention, a chilling tale of a college girl's life brutally cut short by a seemingly innocuous landlord, transforming the picturesque university town into the backdrop of a horrifying true crime drama. Prosecutor Eleanor Vance, a formidable lawyer known for her sharp intellect and unwavering determination, led the charge against Finch. Her opening statement painted a vivid and horrifying picture of Sarah's last moments, her voice resonating with a quiet power that commanded attention. She detailed Finch's meticulous stalking, his twisted obsession, and the cold-blooded act of violence that led to Sarah's death, culminating in the callous disposal of her body in the river. "Arthur Finch," Vance declared, pointing a resolute finger at the defendant, "is a predator who hid in plain sight, a wolf masquerading as a lonely recluse. He did not just take Sarah Jenkins' life. He extinguished a future, a dream, and shattered a family beyond repair." Finch, seated at the defense table, looked markedly different from the man who had been arrested. His once unkempt beard was now neatly trimmed, his hair combed, and he wore a clean, if ill-fitting, suit. He appeared subdued, his former nervous energy replaced by a stoic, almost vacant expression. His defense attorney, a weary public defender named Mr. Hayes, argued that Finch was a deeply troubled individual, suffering from severe mental health issues and a profound sense of loneliness. He attempted to portray Finch as a man who had acted in a moment of panic, not premeditation, overwhelmed by his unrequited affections and a profound inability to connect with others. He claimed Finch had lost control, that it was a tragic accident, not a calculated murder. The prosecution methodically presented its case, piece by piece, building an undeniable mountain of evidence. Detective Miller was the first key witness. He recounted the agonizing search for Sarah, the grim discovery in the river, and the subsequent investigation that led them to Finch. He presented the compelling forensic evidence, the matching tarpaulin and rope, the traces of Sarah's DNA in Finch's study, and crucially, the blood found on the ceramic statue that Finch had used as the murder weapon. Miller's testimony was detailed and unflinching, leaving no room for doubt about the origin of the evidence. Next, the forensic pathologist took the stand, describing Sarah's injuries in graphic detail. The blow to the head, the defensive wounds, and the cause of death. Her professional, clinical assessment only amplified the horror of the crime, painting a picture of a young woman fighting desperately for her life against an assailant much stronger and more determined. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from the collection of photographs Finch had taken of Sarah. Vance displayed them on a large screen in the courtroom, each image a chilling testament to Finch's obsessive surveillance. Photos of Sarah walking to class, studying in the library, laughing with friends, all taken from a distance, without her knowledge. The final photo, time-stamped just hours before her disappearance, showed Sarah leaving the library, a perfectly innocent moment captured by a malevolent eye. Liam and Chloe also testified, their voices filled with grief and anger. They spoke of Sarah's vibrant personality, her dreams, and her general apprehension about Finch's odd behavior. Chloe recounted how Finch would often linger a little too long when collecting rent, making Sarah uncomfortable. Liam described how Finch once accidentally left a note for Sarah about a minor repair, rather than addressing it to all tenants, singling her out. Their testimony subtly but effectively established Finch's pattern of targeting Sarah long before her murder. During cross-examination, Mr. Hayes tried to poke holes in the prosecution's narrative. He questioned the chain of custody for some evidence, suggested alternative explanations for the DNA traces, and attempted to portray the photographs as a harmless, albeit peculiar, hobby. However, Vance meticulously countered each point, reinforcing the strength of her case. The turning point came when Finch himself took the stand. Against the advice of his attorney, he insisted on telling his side of the story. His testimony was rambling and self-pitying. He described his loneliness, his perception of Sarah as a kindred spirit, and how her rejection had crushed him. He reiterated his claim that the struggle was an accident, a desperate attempt to prevent her from calling the police. He tried to elicit sympathy, portraying himself as a victim of circumstance, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't control. However, Vance's cross-examination was brutal and effective. She systematically exposed the contradictions in his story, highlighting the premeditated nature of his actions. "Mr. Finch," she asked, her voice cutting through the courtroom's silence. "You meticulously photographed Sarah for months. You knew her routine. You had a spare key. You entered her home uninvited. You had a tarpaulin and rope ready. You even had a pre-selected location, a desolate stretch of the river, to dispose of her body. Does that sound like an accident to you, Mr. Finch? Or does it sound like a carefully planned execution?" Finch stammered, his composure crumbling under Vance's relentless questioning. He struggled to maintain his victimhood narrative, his true character, that of a calculating and self-serving individual, slowly revealed to the jury. When Vance presented the ceramic statue, the very weapon he had used, asking him to confirm it, Finch visibly flinched, his eyes wide with terror and regret. He finally admitted, in a shaky voice, that he had struck her, not intending to kill, but in a desperate attempt to silence her. He then detailed, in chillingly cold prose, how he had bound her, how he had wheeled her to the river, and how he had watched her sink. His confession, though delivered with a veneer of self-pity, was undeniably an admission of guilt. The jury, composed of 12 ordinary citizens of Havenwood, listened intently throughout the trial. The weight of the evidence, coupled with Finch's own contradictory and ultimately self-incriminating testimony, left little room for doubt. After 3 days of deliberations, the verdict was delivered. We find the defendant, Arthur Finch, guilty of the first-degree murder of Sarah Jenkins. A collective gasp, followed by a wave of relief and muted sobs, swept through the courtroom. Emily and David Jenkins, their faces streaked with tears, embraced tightly. A small, almost imperceptible nod passed between Detective Miller and Eleanor Vance. Justice, hard-won and long-awaited, had finally been served. The sentencing took place a week later. Judge Thompson, her voice grave, addressed Arthur Finch directly. She spoke of the profound tragedy of Sarah's death, the devastation inflicted upon her family, and the betrayal of trust Finch had committed as a landlord. She recounted the details of his obsession, his calculated actions, and his remorseless attempt to hide his crime. "Arthur Finch," Judge Thompson pronounced, "you have committed a heinous act, taking a young, vibrant life and leaving behind a trail of unimaginable grief. For the first-degree murder of Sarah Jenkins, I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Finch showed no discernible emotion as the sentence was delivered, his face a blank mask. He was led away, his chapter in society closed forever. Outside the courthouse, Emily Jenkins, her voice still trembling but now imbued with a newfound strength, addressed the throng of reporters. Sarah was a bright, beautiful, and ambitious young woman. Her life was tragically cut short by a monster. While no sentence can ever bring our daughter back, we find some peace in knowing that Arthur Finch will never be able to harm another soul. We urge everyone to be vigilant, to trust their instincts, and to speak up if something feels wrong. Sarah's memory will live on, and we will continue to advocate for the safety of all young people. The trial brought a bitter closure to the horrific events that had rocked Havenwood. The community began the slow, painful process of healing, forever marked by the Tenant trap. Sarah Jenkins' name became a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the hidden dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. The next and final chapter would explore the aftermath, the lessons learned, and the enduring legacy of Sarah's tragic story. The reverberations of Arthur Finch's trial and conviction lingered in Havenwood long after the media circus had moved on. The town, once known for its picturesque charm and academic prestige, was now synonymous with the Tenant trap, a dark stain on its reputation. The horror of Sarah Jenkins' murder had irrevocably altered the community's fabric, leaving behind a lingering sense of vulnerability and a renewed vigilance. For the Jenkins family, life would never be the same. The conviction of Arthur Finch brought a measure of justice, a confirmation that Sarah's killer would pay for his monstrous crime, but it could never fill the void she left behind. Emily and David Jenkins returned.